A young German shepherd was brought to the rescue center in a haunting stillness, his eyes locked in a world no one could reach. For 3 weeks, he refused food, offered no response. Then, during a late-night shift, a young vet found an old sketch taped inside the kennel with trembling words, "If someone truly comes without a stick, he will believe again." From that moment, Luca's journey began. Slow, gentle, and quietly full of hope. Until one stormy night when Luca's howl led the team back to something no one expected. The afternoon in the outskirts wore a weary shade of amber. The sun tilted over moss-covered rooftops, its fading light filtering through the bare, end-of-season branches, casting quiet streaks on the dirt path that led to an abandoned house on the edge of town. The rescue team's pickup truck pulled up at the side of the road, its tires crunching over a bed of decaying leaves with a brittle crackle. 2 responders stepped out, equipped with flashlights, protective gear, and lock-breaking tools. The woman with short hair, Malia, held a crumpled note in her hand. Old address? Faint barking heard from inside. The scrawl was from a neighbor who had phoned in the tip just after dawn, voice trembling with unease. The house stood silent like a forgotten sculpture. The front door was locked from the inside, windows boarded up with rotting wood. Its peeling walls exposed rough brick like old wounds that never quite healed. Malia knocked without expecting an answer, but followed procedure. Her partner, Ramon, circled quietly to the back, searching for entry through a broken corner of the kitchen window. 10 minutes later, they broke the lock on a rear ground-floor room. The door opened with a squeal, releasing a wave of damp air, the stench of spoiled food and animal fur long left to rot. In the dim room, a single bulb illuminated a corner of the floor, where an old blanket lay curled like a nest. Beside it, a water bowl sat bone dry. In the center of the room, a shadow was curled tight. A puppy motionless, his once glossy black and tan fur, now matted into uneven clumps. His hind legs were tucked tight against his belly, head tilted to one side, eyes slightly open. Watching, always watching, though the pupils never shifted. No growl, no flinch, no reaction as the flashlight beam moved closer. But if one looked closely, they would see his stomach rise and fall, slow and deliberate, like he was holding his breath for something worse. Malia knelt. Surrounded by the thick air of mold and stillness, she spoke in a steady voice, almost a whisper to herself. "What's your name, sweetheart? Has anyone ever called you by a name?" Of course, the pup didn't answer, but his ears twitched, just slightly. The first sign of life since they entered. Malia didn't reach for him. She simply set the emergency kit down beside her, took out a clean towel and a pouch of packaged food, placed them gently in front of him, then stepped back. 30 minutes passed. The only sounds were the offbeat tick of a broken clock and the soft breathing of a creature curled in on itself. Ramon checked the rest of the house. The living room had been torn apart. Drag marks trailed across the floor as if something, or someone, had once been pulled. The walls bore dents likely from boots or sticks. In the kitchen, they found a long bamboo rod. Its head was still wrapped with cloth, bound by rope. When Malia saw the stick, she turned back to the puppy, who was staring at the floor, the very spot where that rod may have struck the most. Under the flashlight, a few faded scars across his back began to emerge. "We need to get him out," Ramon said gently. "Carefully. He's right at the edge." They wrapped the puppy in a blanket, carried him out, leaving behind the plastic bowl and worn-out bedding like a closing chapter in a house that never should have held a life. On the drive back to the rescue center, the pup made no sound. No struggle. No trembling. He didn't lean in nor shy away. He just kept his eyes open, watching the world blur past the window like scattered fragments of something broken. At the shelter, he was placed in an isolated kennel at the far end of the hall. Staff recorded a preliminary intake German Shepherd male approx. 7 months, name unknown. Severely withdrawn. Signs of prolonged abuse. Temporary ID GSD7B. And beneath that, in red ink, special observation. Possible behavioral disconnect. When the hallway lights dimmed for the night, the faint glow of a safety bulb reached into the steel wire kennel. The puppy, who would later be named Luca, kept his eyes open. The rod was gone. The room was gone. But something in that gaze remained tightly wound, like an invisible tether holding him back from stepping forward. And in that hush, a new night shift began. A pair of white sneakers stopped at his kennel door. By morning, the sky had turned a dull gray, dusting the world in a film of stillness. The Ardentown Animal Rescue Center started its routine, the rattle of gate locks, the soft scent of pre-portioned meals for dogs and cats. Drifting down the hallway, a clipboard pinned neatly to the bulletin board with the day's assignments. Kennel Row 3, designated for high-needs cases, remained bathed in warm yellow light, a small act of kindness toward those carrying invisible bruises. At the last kennel, the German Shepherd pup, labeled GSD7B, tentatively called Luca, curled tightly against the wall. His head tucked under his tail, front paws folded close like a fragile shield. His food bowl had been replaced early. The kibble untouched, still whole. Next to it, a clean water bowl sat undisturbed. Every time footsteps passed, Luca's ears twitched slightly. But his eyes stayed fixed, unfocused, gazing somewhere between memory and nowhere. Malia was the first to check on him. She knelt down, positioning herself as small and non-threatening as possible. Flipping open the intake log, she turned to the page from yesterday. No contact. No eating. Normal breathing. Eyes open. Movement under 15 centimeters over 16 hours. "How long do you plan to starve yourself?" she asked quietly, almost as a sigh. There was no answer. But that didn't deter her. She knew all too well. Some wounds, if touched too early, could crumble whatever healing had just begun. The only thing she could offer now was presence. Quiet, patient, and unwavering. By late morning, the care team divided up responsibilities to update each animal's evaluation chart. Luca was circled in orange, neutral zone, indicating that his recovery potential remained undetermined. But at the bottom corner of the form, a staff member named Dean scribbled a line in pen, "Condition stagnant. Consider removal from recovery program next week." Malia frowned when she saw it. She dropped into a wooden bench in the hallway, resting her arm on her forehead. To many, Luca was just a case number, a line item among dozens that came through each month. But for her, for the one who had seen that room, the worn blanket, and those wide-open eyes staring at the ceiling as if guarding a secret, Luca was something else entirely. That afternoon, a group of student volunteers arrived for a scheduled visit. They were instructed to stay clear of Kennel Row 3. While other dogs barked, bounced, and wagged in hopes of attention, Luca remained still. So still it was as if he hadn't even noticed they'd come in. One curly-haired girl lingered by the bars, peeking through. She stood there a long time, watching Luca. "Why isn't this dog happy like the others?" she whispered. Standing behind her, Malia answered with a voice as soft as the breeze. "Some creatures have spent too long in silence. So now they need time to believe someone's truly listening." The girl didn't say anything more. But before she left, she placed a small peppermint wrapped in green paper at the edge of Luca's kennel. A wordless goodbye in the form of a gift. Evening arrived. The light dimmed to gray. Luca hadn't moved from his place. But Malia noticed a subtle change. The blanket beneath him had shifted slightly, as though he had turned in a brief sleep. A sign. Small, but real. Ramon passed by, reading the latest notes from the surveillance footage, then sighed. He doesn't react to food voices, burned wood, even fan noise. No sniffing, no eye contact. It's like he's withdrawn from life entirely. Malia closed the folder, her voice calm but firm. If everyone gave up that early, this place wouldn't need to exist. Ramon gave a dry chuckle, then shook his head and walked away. In the last light of day, Luca still lay there, eyes half shut, half open. It looked like sleep, but there was a faint spark in them whenever footsteps passed. A flicker, barely there, but never gone. And later, during the final feeding of the day, Malia noticed something. The little green-wrapped peppermint had been pulled closer to Luca's side. A small movement. A change, enough to warm her chest against the evening chill. She sat there in silence for a few minutes, then stood slipping a folded paper into the pocket of her lab coat. Tomorrow would bring a new shift, a new face. And she hoped, whoever it was, they'd stay long enough to see the faint glow that still lived quietly in Luca's gaze. Down the outer hallway, the lights flicked on. The door turned once. Footsteps echoed slow and steady. That morning, sunlight spread gently through the frosted windows of Arden's Animal Rescue Center, like a whispered blessing upon every soul still healing behind clean metal bars. A faint trace of disinfectant drifted in the air, blending with the quiet sound of rubber soles brushing against tile as the staff began their usual rounds. In Kennel Row 3, Luca remained curled in his usual spot. His posture had relaxed slightly since the first day, but his eyes still held a distance from anything that came close. That day's morning shift belonged to Jackson, a new staff member who had only been at the center for 2 weeks. Jackson was tall, solidly built, and moved with a direct confidence. He'd previously worked with a wildlife anti-poaching unit, and his approach to animals was hands-on and straightforward. He held the clipboard under one arm, frowning as he stopped in front of Luca's kennel. 3 days without eating, no barking, no reaction to strong-smelling food. "All right, buddy. Time for a little push," he muttered. From a distance, Malia spotted him opening the latch. "Wait," she called out. "You need to go slow with that one. He's not like the others." Jackson turned and flashed a casual grin. "I'm just sitting. No touching. I know the rules." The kennel door cracked open. Luca didn't move. Jackson crouched a few feet away, placing both hands on his thighs, keeping his gaze below the dog's eye level, just as the training had taught. He stayed quiet for a few seconds. Then slowly, he leaned forward, stretching one hand to place a piece of food a bit closer. That exact moment, Luca sprang to life. With no warning, no build-up, he let out a deep, guttural sound from somewhere deep in his chest, a short, sharp growl that froze the space around it. His front paws slammed the ground, spine-arched tail stiff like a drawn line. Jackson flinched. He backed away by instinct, bumping into the back wall of the kennel. The whole row shook. A few other dogs started barking at the sudden noise. But Luca didn't move beyond that. He stood rooted in place, unchanged, unmoving, unblinking, as if carved from fear itself. Malia arrived, voice low and steady. "Leave it. I'll handle the rest." Jackson pressed his lips together, offered no argument. He stepped back, folded his clipboard, and walked quickly toward the office. By noon, the small meeting room behind the rescue center hosted its scheduled staff debrief. The one in charge, Senior Manager Regina, was a stern woman whose neat files and frosty gaze made her tone seem warm in comparison. When the team reached Luca's name on the roster, she looked up from her evaluation sheet. GSD 7B. 3 days without food. 1 vocal aggression incident. No clear progress. Opinions. Jackson was first to speak. "I believe this dog is completely resistant to any engagement. There's no behavioral improvement. He could be dangerous in a recovery setting." Regina tapped her pen against the desk. Malia opened her mouth to respond, but the manager's gaze halted her. "I understand," Regina said slowly. I'll file the paperwork to move Luca to the preliminary euthanasia review list. 7 days for further observation. If there's no improvement, remove from program." The room fell silent. In the corner, the soft hum of the office printer began to whir, its sound slicing through the quiet like a verdict written in ink. That afternoon, Malia walked slowly down the hallway, a copy of the decision folded in her hand, her chest tightening with each step. She stopped in front of Luca's kennel and sat as she did every day. The puppy had returned to his usual curled-up position, eyes still open. When she gently tapped the paper against the bars, Luca glanced at it, then turned his head away. "You scared everyone, little one?" Malia murmured, her voice sounding like a story she was telling herself. "You've been clinging to your old shadow? Like a child clutching a memory, afraid that letting go means losing everything." She fell quiet for a long moment, then placed a small piece of yellow fabric beside his water bowl. It was from the cleaning cloth she always used when tending his kennel. A scent he knew. Something familiar. Something safe. Before leaving, she wrote a final note in his observation log. Growling isn't an attack. It's the last signal a living creature sends to say, "I'm still here." Behind her in the fading silence of the day, Luca's eyes shifted. Just slightly. Not much. But enough to make a faint mark on the graph that had been flat for 3 days. At the end of the hall, the glass door turned once more. A young man in a white coat stepped inside carrying a clipboard and a freshly printed file. The first person to mention the name Elio at the Arden Rescue Center was a logistics staffer named Chris. During a break, after hearing Luca had been moved to the euthanasia review list, he shook his head and let out a long breath. If it were Elio, maybe that pup would still have a chance. A new volunteer on the morning shift asked, "Who's Elio?" Chris pointed to the duty roster, an entry in the far bottom corner written in blue ink, "Night shift." Monday to Thursday, Dr. Elio Ruiz volunteer. Elio never arrived at fixed hours, but he always showed up when scheduled. He came after most others had gone, after kennels were locked, reports updated, and the hallway lights dimmed. He brought a small medical bag, a thin stack of files, and a sandwich wrapped in newspaper. He wasn't on any official veterinary board in town. He'd signed up as a night volunteer 2 years ago, on a drizzly evening when the center was short-staffed. Malia had been the one to receive him. The first thing she remembered was his gaze, not bright, not rushed, not cold, just quiet like a still lake in late autumn. She'd asked him why he chose the night shift. "Daytime is too loud," Elio had answered. "But at night, I can hear every breath." He never told his full story, but the staff had pieced together fragments. Elio's younger brother, Matteo, had died at 17. A fall from the 3rd-floor railing following weeks of isolation. Matteo had locked himself away, refused visitors, refused help. Elio was 21 at the time, a 3rd-year veterinary student. On the day of Matteo's burial, Elio walked behind the casket, holding the only thing his brother had let near him during those final weeks, a quiet gray cat. Since then, Elio had never chosen modern clinics or big city animal hospitals. He asked to be transferred to work with abandoned animals, the ones labeled too damaged, too late. "There are cases that won't fully recover," he once told Malia on a night shift. "But if we sit with them long enough, we realize life doesn't have to be perfect to be worth keeping." In the past 3 months alone, Elio had worked with 6 abuse survivors. 2 made full recoveries. 3 showed visible improvement. 1, who only lived for 3 more weeks, still passed peacefully in the warmth of a foster home, not in a cold cage. He didn't bring new techniques, no breakthrough therapies. What Elio brought was time, the kind of time most people had run out of patience to give. Each night he walked the kennels slowly without speaking much. For the animals that feared touch, he sat beside their enclosures and wrote his files right there, letting them adjust to his presence without pressure. For those that flinched at raised objects, he removed the long pen from his coat pocket, a quiet message. Nothing here will hurt you. And that very night, Elio began his first shift of the week. He parked outside the center, turned off the headlights, and cracked his window. The wind from the nearby fields carried in the scent of dry grass and the faint distant hoot of owls. He opened his folder. The first file was marked in red case GSD 7B. Final observation week. Recommended for transfer. Elio closed the file, then took a sticky note and wrote one small line. I'll go in last. If that soul is still in there, I want to hear what hasn't yet been said. At the far end of the hall, Luca still lay still. In the dim light, his blanket had shifted slightly from a turn made in the night. His food remained untouched, the water unbothered. But the air felt different as the white coat approached. Without haste, without the sterile scent of chemicals. Elio knelt down in front of the kennel. He didn't sit, just bent one knee, placing himself slightly below the level of the dog's eyes. From his pocket, he pulled out a small bag of broken biscuits, not dropping them in the tray, but resting them in the open palm of his hand, turned upward, motionless. Luca opened his eyes. No barking, no growl, just a gaze, steady and hollow. But to someone who had lived through enough grief, Elio didn't need any more than that to understand. Somewhere in those eyes was the same question he had carried through all his youth. Is there anyone left in the world who won't walk away too soon? Down the corridor, the wall clock ticked to midnight. The night shift had officially begun. And with it, the center entered that rare, tender silence only found at night, when the day's noise had been folded neatly away into an invisible drawer. Only the soft humming of fluorescent lights, the wind whispering through the doors, and the quiet, rhythmic breaths of those still learning how to heal remained. Elio was familiar with that kind of slow rhythm. He didn't hurry, didn't try to fill the silence with words. Every footstep on the cold tile carried the same steady beat. Calm, attentive, willing to stay. Close to 1 a.m., he returned to Kennel Row 3 after checking the isolation unit. Luca still lay curled in the same spot as if trying to preserve whatever warmth remained from his own body. The dim overhead light reflected off the matted fur on his back in a faint ashen glow, like the ember of a fire buried in ash. Elio sat down on the wooden ledge outside the kennel. He brought no food this time, no clipboard. He simply sat still, hands gently laced over his knees. Luca didn't turn, but his eyes shifted, just slightly, toward Elio. So slight that if you weren't paying close attention, you might have mistaken it for a flicker of light. Moments passed. Then Elio tilted his head, as if something unseen had drawn his gaze. He moved closer, not breaching the safety line, but pausing when he noticed a small corner of paper sticking out from behind the wooden panel fastened inside the kennel wall. The paper was old, its edges curled. It looked like someone had hidden it behind the board using a faint glue, keeping it out of view from cleaners. Elio gently loosened the panel and shone his phone's light over the scrap. Pencil marks, uneven, smudged, but still legible. His name is Shadow. Please don't leave him again. He's only scared of sticks. Beneath the note was a rough drawing of a large black and tan dog sitting beside a small human figure with outstretched arms. No facial features, no color, just rough lines drawn with a kind of urgency. And yet it hit Elio like a hand brushing against a memory long buried. He said nothing, just folded the note carefully and set it next to the kennel, then returned to his seat. Luca had turned toward him now. He wasn't growling, he wasn't wary, but his eyes weren't avoiding contact anymore. They were deep, but no longer clouded, like the bottom of a still well. In them was something closer to a question, a kind of waiting, as if all these nights Luca had silently hoped someone would find that message and understand. Elio exhaled slowly. He reached into his coat and pulled out the long pen he usually carried. Then he set it down beside him, deliberately choosing not to bring it into the kennel area. That small act meant something. It wasn't just the removal of an object. It was a silent message: I didn't come here to diagnose or correct. I came here to stay. A while later, Luca lifted his head. He didn't approach, but his chin no longer rested on his paws. It was raised, listening. His ears twitched gently in Elio's direction. The light in his eyes remained faint, but this time it was the light of a creature beginning to assess the world again. Not from fear, but from awareness. Elio slowly opened his notebook and wrote one short line. Behavior shifted after discovering hidden note. Maintained eye contact for over 1 minute. Sign of initial connection. He closed the notebook. Before leaving, he retrieved the paper and taped it securely back to the kennel wall, this time with stronger tape. He wanted the drawing to remain right where it belonged, where it had first been placed, in hope that someone would see. As he exited the hallway, Elio turned back once more. Luca was still watching. He didn't move, but his eyes didn't pass through Elio as if he were invisible. They held steady, like maybe Elio was the first person Luca believed wouldn't disappear into the night. Outside, dawn had yet to break. A deep blue was spreading gently behind the clouds, stretching toward the horizon. The fields behind the shelters shimmered with silver mist, making everything look like it had drifted out of a dream just before waking. Elio stood there a moment, letting the chill curl into his collar, listening to the steady beat of his heart after a long night. He didn't know what would come next, but he knew that in those eyes that had once belonged to something left behind, something had begun to stir again. Not submission, not obedience, but a choice. The choice to trust the one who stayed. At the Arden Rescue Center one midweek evening, the hallway lights switched to night mode, casting soft yellow glows across the smooth tiles. The whole place felt more like a library of silent souls than a shelter for wounded animals. Kennel Row 3 had gone quiet. Only the slow breaths remained, and the eyes half open in the dark, waiting for something they didn't yet have the words to name. Elio entered. His white coat was worn loose cuffs, rolled gently to the forearms. He walked slowly, his steps silent. In his arms, a small folding stool, a medical bag, and a brown paper sack with soft rice-scented rolls. No files, no clipboard, no long pen clipped to his chest. He stopped in front of Luca's kennel, or rather in front of the gaze that hadn't blinked once since he appeared in the hallway. Luca had shifted from his side to a half-seated position, ears tilted forward, eyes no longer guarded. Elio didn't speak. He opened the stool and placed it about 1 meter from the kennel bars, far enough to avoid pressure, close enough for warm breaths to meet through the wire. He sat. From his pocket, he pulled a clean handkerchief, not to wipe, but to place gently across his lap. On it, he scattered a few bits of soft bread. Nothing fragrant, nothing rich. Just mild, digestible crumbs for a stomach that hadn't tolerated strong flavors in some time. Then Elio did what most people forgot in recovery cases. He stayed quiet. No come here, no good boy, no hello sweetheart. Just presence, whole, patient, still. Luca watched him. His gaze wasn't sharp like yesterday, nor flat like it had been on the first day. It was the gaze of something asking, is this silence actually safe? Time passed, melting into the air between them. Elio didn't move. His eyes weren't locked on Luca, but his awareness wrapped gently around the entire space, like a shelter that didn't require walls. When the first piece of bread fell from the handkerchief swept by a draft, he didn't bend to pick it up. He left it there, A quiet invitation. Without pressure. Without force. Luca blinked. The scent of the bread began to reach his nose, faint but enough to notice. He shifted his weight slightly forward, his front paws stretching out just a little farther. Then he stopped. His gaze remained fixed on Elio. Elio stayed silent. Roughly 3 minutes passed before Luca slowly stood. His first time on his feet in over 5 days. His legs trembled. His shoulders wavered, but his ears perked up as if listening to a song only he could hear. He stepped forward. Each movement was cautious, like probing an old memory, where a voice calling his name might have once been, followed by a stick, a rope, or a harsh hand. But this time there was none of that. Just steady breath, an open bag of bread, and eyes that never looked away. As Luca reached the edge of the kennel, Elio slowly removed his white coat, folded it, and placed it gently near the bars. His arm was bare now, his hand resting palm down on the ground, fingers lightly touching the handkerchief. Not inside the kennel, not extended, just placed there, as if it had always belonged. Luca lowered his head, touching his nose to the sleeve, where the scent of the man who had sat quietly in front of him for the last half hour lingered. Then gently, he extended his tongue and gave one soft lick, not to taste, but as if to ask whether this scent could be trusted. Elio didn't flinch. He simply closed his eyes. A brief blink, like a wordless thank you, that wouldn't break the fragile moment between them. After a while, Luca pulled back, returned to his corner, and curled down, not burying his head this time. Instead, his chin rested on his front legs, and his eyes remained open, watching Elio. Elio gave a small nod, then stood and folded the stool. Before leaving, he removed the name badge from his coat pocket and placed it near the kennel, exactly where Luca had touched his nose. A small gesture, but it felt like planting a flag in newly opened territory, claimed not by dominance but by trust. As Elio stepped out into the hallway, the wind stirred the chime hanging on the back door. Outside, mist began to creep along the fence. Far off in the field, early fireflies shimmered, like signals returning from somewhere distant and unseen. Back in the row of kennels, Luca slowly turned his body. His eyes still looked toward the doorway Elio had just passed through. For the first time, he slept without facing the wall. The next morning, the Arden Rescue Center opened under a damp sky. A fine layer of mist still clung to the window panes, as if even the air was trying to hold on to something not yet ready to vanish. In the staff room, the duty board was updated with a few fresh notices, one for the routine health check of dogs in recovery, and another pinned with a red clip, morning meeting 10 a.m. Director's office. Regarding case GSD-7B. Malia read it first. She stayed silent, her eyes drifting toward the hallway leading to row 3. In the last kennel, Luca lay on his side, head turned toward the outside. His expression was calm, as if the previous night had been a long dream, and the person who had sat quietly by his side, who gave no commands, who never forced a word, had been real. At the same time, Elio knocked on the director's office door. A small room at the far end of the hallway, its walls lined with certificates, photos of adopted dogs and cats, and a desk that remained meticulously tidy, just like the woman who sat behind it. Regina, the center's director, had a gaze as sharp as a fine blade. She didn't waste time on preambles. "I read your report from last night," she said flatly. "You acted against the recommendation in his file. That observation period ends today, doesn't it?" Elio nodded, placing a thin folder on her desk. "I don't deny that, but I'd like you to read the last page before making a final decision." Regina opened the folder. Elio's handwriting was clean and precise. The final page contained only a short entry, Day 6, direct contact, no defensive reaction. Voluntary nose contact with coat sleeve. First sign of nonverbal connection established. Requesting hold on euthanasia transfer. Proposing reassignment to Level 1 Psychological Recovery Program, 14-day duration. She closed the folder, drumming her fingers on the desk for a few seconds. You know the numbers, she said. In these types of recovery cases, only 2 out of 10 succeed. That's less than 15%. Every day we extend it is another day of costs, staff strain, and a kennel slot taken. Elio responded calmly. But if he doesn't fall within that 15%, then why do we call ourselves a rescue center at all? The air inside the room slowed, like the words had landed somewhere deeper. Regina remained silent for a few beats, then stood and walked to the window. From there she could see the yard behind the building, where a few recovering dogs were being walked for physical therapy. "Are you sure, Elio?" she asked without turning. "Sure that what you saw last night wasn't just random?" Elio nodded again, his voice unwavering. He didn't speak. But life takes many forms. Sometimes it's an eye that no longer avoids yours. Sometimes it's a nose that touches where your scent lives. And sometimes it's simply turning to face the world for the first time after a week curled up against a wall. Regina turned back to her desk. She opened her computer, typed out a short document, and printed 2 copies. "I'm putting a 14-day hold on the euthanasia order under the Level 1 recovery proposal. But Elio, if there's no clear progress in 2 weeks, I'll sign the final paperwork myself. And next time, I'll be the one following up, not your handwritten reports." Elio accepted the copy and gave a small bow. Her tone had held steel, but he knew the only thing that mattered had happened. Luca would stay. For 14 more days. And for a soul trying to return to life, sometimes one day is everything. That afternoon, Kennel Row 3 was freshly cleaned. Malia came in with a new blanket and a small sleeping mat scented with pine, an herbal scent that helped dogs rest easier. She approached Luca's kennel and quietly unlocked the latch. There was no flinch. Luca was lying down, head slightly lifted. When he saw her, he didn't pull back. He simply tilted his head, watching. Malia laid the mat, spread the blanket over the corner of the kennel. She said softly, "You're not going anywhere. Every day someone will be here to stay with you." She pressed her hand gently against the outer bars, then stepped away. Behind her, Luca slowly approached, lay down on the mat, and rested his chin on the new fabric. His ears pointed toward the hallway, and his eyes remained open, waiting for footsteps that had now become familiar. That evening, Elio returned as he always did. In his hand was an old collar, not to be worn, but to be placed in front of the kennel. It had once belonged to another dog, a creature saved from the edge who had gone on to live beside a child silenced by trauma. He said nothing, just laid the collar down and took his seat waiting. Luca approached. He looked at the collar, then at Elio. He didn't lick his hand. He didn't lean in. But he stood still, as if to say, "If you're willing to stay, I'll take it one step at a time." The therapy room at Arden Rescue Center didn't look like a typical clinic. The walls were painted soft green, the lighting gentle, and the air free of antiseptic scent. In the corner stood a low bookshelf topped with a few clean but worn wooden toys. At the center sat a thick, round mat with a pattern resembling a night sky, a sky without stars. It was a space for emotional recovery built for children carrying invisible wounds. Elio had helped redesign it once. "Don't make it too bright," he had said the first time he walked in. "There are eyes that haven't learned how to face the light." That week, a special session was prepared. Elio had proposed bringing in Luca, the dog once marked for euthanasia, to join the silent support group for children with selective mutism and emotional shutdown. The idea had sparked concern. Luca had only just begun showing signs of responsiveness. But Elio stood firm. He doesn't need to respond. He just needs to be. Because some connections only happen between two beings who've both walked through darkness. Noah, 8 years old, was the child assigned for the first session. He hadn't spoken a word since the car accident that took his mother. Every week he came with his father, sat on that night sky mat, clutching a frayed teddy bear. His eyes locked on the window, like he was waiting for something no one else could see. That morning, Noah entered with a therapist. He didn't resist, but his body remained tightly drawn and held together by habit. Elio stood waiting. Beside him, Luca, now wearing a soft brown collar. No leash. Luca stood still. No tail wagging, no approaching. Just there, at the edge of the mat, watching quietly with eyes that had softened greatly since the first night he met Elio. Elio sat first. He said nothing to Noah. He simply placed a small box of unscented dog biscuits beside him. Then he turned to Luca and with a cloth from his pocket gently wiped the edge of the dog's collar. An act of quiet ritual, like brushing off the dust before entering sacred ground. Noah sat 3 steps away. He looked at Luca, then at Elio. Unblinking. Still. The air seemed to pause, and then, with no prompting, no cues, Luca took 1 step forward, then another. At 2 meters away from Noah, he stopped, lowered his head, lay down on the mat. He didn't look directly at the boy. His gaze turned sideways, off to nowhere in particular, as if to let the child know he wasn't being watched. A soft stillness settled in. In that quiet, the only thing that moved was breath. And in that breath, Noah leaned forward, just slightly, as if trying to see this creature more clearly. 10 minutes passed. Elio didn't intervene. He just watched. And then, like the slow shift of stars, Noah unwrapped his arms from the teddy bear, set it aside, and began crawling toward Luca. The moment wasn't loud, but in Elio's chest, it rang like a knock on the door of memory. The boy, silent for 4 months, had reached out to another silent being. Noah didn't touch him. He simply sat, close eyes resting on the dark fur. Luca didn't move, but his spine eased, his shoulders slackened, like he too was breathing more freely now. After a while, Elio spoke for the first time. His name is Luca, but someone once called him Shadow. Noah blinked. He used to be afraid of sticks, and someone left him behind. Silence. Then, faintly, a small sound escaped the boy's throat. Not a word, not yet, but a whisper from a voice that had been asleep for too long. Noah said something. No one heard clearly, but Elio didn't ask him to repeat. He simply nodded, as if he understood. And at that moment, a tear slipped from the corner of the boy's eye and fell onto the mat. Luca tilted his head. His eyes met Noah's for the first time. No blinking, no turning away. And in that look, there was a gentle light, a silent promise, I'm here. At the end of the session, Elio stepped into the hallway and noted the session's length on his watch. Luca walked beside him, not leashed, not called. Behind them, Noah was led out by the therapist. His hands no longer held the worn teddy bear. He turned back and for the first time spoke a full sentence, "Will he come again?" Elio turned. He didn't answer with words, just placed his hand gently on Luca's neck and nodded. On Elio's desk, the old paper with the scribbled message remained pressed inside a leather journal. His name is Shadow. Please don't leave him again. He's only afraid of sticks. And now Shadow had stepped into a room that smelled of tears. Not to revisit pain, but to help someone else find the way out of it. A week after their first meeting, there were no miracles. No sudden hug between the boy and the dog, no joyful outbursts, no viral video capturing a magical breakthrough. Just the same soft mat shaped like the sky, the afternoon light slanting in from the window, and two beings, one human, one dog, sharing the same space without disturbing each other's quiet. Luca was always brought in first. He lay in the same spot, still, silent. No signs of welcome, no effort to engage. Elio changed nothing. The old cloth was placed in the same corner. The biscuit pouch stayed tucked beside the mat. No gloves, no intrusive objects. Noah entered holding the same teddy bear, still in his ash-gray sweater hair falling gently over his brow. His gaze lingered on Luca just a little longer than before. But his feet hadn't moved forward yet. He sat farther away than that first day. Back against the wall, knees pulled to chest, arms wrapped around them. Silent. Watching. Elio sat on the low stool in the corner of the room, sometimes taking notes, sometimes just gazing out the window. He didn't interfere. He didn't prompt. In sessions like these, he understood. The most important thing was often to do nothing at all, to avoid breaking the fragile rhythm of self-healing as it began to form. And so it continued for 4 consecutive days, each one nearly a mirror of the last. Luca lay in his usual spot, eyes half closed, as if asleep, yet still watching movement from the corner of his gaze. Noah came, observed, but didn't reach out. His eyes would flicker now and then as if to ask, will something be different today? But always closed again beneath that familiar veil of caution. On the 5th day, Elio stopped writing. He simply sat still, fingers quietly rubbing the folded cloth in his palm. The same cloth Luca had touched with his nose that very first time. Noah entered. Today he carried nothing. His hands were empty. To Elio that meant more than any word. The boy walked slowly, his gaze locked on Luca. As he neared the mat, he stopped. Elio didn't look. Luca didn't stir. But something shifted in the air, like when a familiar song is played in a slower key, the same melody but weighted deeper on its lower notes. Noah sat down at the edge of the mat. He placed his hands on his knees, hesitant, then opened them. Palms down, resting close to the floor. Luca didn't move, but his ears tilted gently toward the boy, the only sign that he had noticed. No one spoke. No one needed to. After the session, Elio jotted a brief entry into the therapy log, day 5. Noah arrived without comfort object. Sat within 1 meter of Luca. No negative reaction. Luca remained lying down, ears oriented toward Noah, for 3 continuous minutes. No change is still a form of change. He folded the notebook and slipped it into his pocket, then turned back toward the therapy room, now tidied for the day. The last rays of daylight spilled across the window, warming the space with a soft, honey-colored glow. That's when he recalled something his old university professor had once told him. Some wounds don't need to be healed. They just need someone to sit beside them long enough, so they stop believing they are broken. Elio understood. That's what Luca was doing for Noah, and what Noah in turn was doing for Luca. Together in their own quiet ways, they were filling in the gaps that others had long ignored, simply because silence had gone on too long. That evening in Kennel Row 3, Luca finished all the breadcrumbs. For the first time in many days, he lay down afterward, resting his head on his paws, eyes softly closing, as if recalling something that had just happened. A few kennels nearby still echoed with faint barking. But in Luca's space, there was only the sound of wind passing through the bars, and the deep, slow breathing of a creature who had traveled a long road through the mind. In the staff room, Elio left a small note pinned to the duty board. Luca, continue silent communication therapy. No prompting, no expectation of speech. because not everyone needs a voice to be reached. On the ceiling of the therapy room, the last sliver of sunlight caught the circular light fixture. Elio stood beneath it, switched off the lights, and gently pulled the door closed. As his hand left the handle, something passed quietly through his chest. Not a clear thought, but enough to bring a faint smile to his face. Silence. But still, they were listening. Since the day Noah left the teddy bear behind, no one had needed to encourage him. Every afternoon, at exactly 3:15, he stepped into the therapy room. With a small canvas backpack carrying nothing inside but a box of colored pencils and a wrinkled sketch pad. He still didn't meet the adult's eyes, but his steps had grown steadier. His body seemed to have memorized the way to a place where silence was welcome. Luca was always there first. He lay stretched along the edge of the mat, where the slanting light of late afternoon touched his dark fur, creating a gentle glow, like a thin blanket. No one placed him there. He chose it himself. Closer to Noah each day, inch by inch, steady and soft, like water carving into stone. Noah said nothing. But for the first time he sat facing Luca, rather than turning to the corner as before. He rested his hand on his knee, opened the pencil case, and selected a pale brown crayon. Then he began to draw. The first sketch showed only a large figure from behind, standing in a doorway. No name, no background. But Elio, watching from the low stool, recognized it immediately. Luca as seen from behind the shadowed streak of fur, stretching like dusk across his back. The next day, Noah drew again. This time Luca was curled in sleep, eyes closed, beside a small human figure with outstretched arms, perhaps meant to be Noah himself. And so it continued. Each afternoon, a new piece, a new fragment shaped by slow, careful strokes. Luca didn't move. He just remained there, eyes half closed, while his ears gently shifted with every soft scratch of Noah's pencil. As if he could hear the drawings forming and treated them like the breath of a soul piecing itself back together. One late afternoon, Elio was filing reports in the next room when a therapist ran in, startled. Noah just cried. Elio stood immediately. What happened? No, nothing bad. I mean, it's the first time he's let himself cry. And he didn't run. Elio rushed toward the therapy room. Through the glass panel, he saw Noah sitting hunched over. His shoulders trembled. A crayon still in his hand. A sketch still half finished on the floor. The drawing showed two children holding hands. One had tousled brown hair, the other longer hair and a bright open smile. Beside him, Luca had sat up. He didn't move closer, but he lifted his head and let out a soft sound. Not a bark, not a whine. Something closer to a sigh, low and quiet like wind slipping through a door. Noah looked up. His eyes were red, but he didn't hide. He looked at Luca, and for the first time reached out and touched his back, a real touch. No hesitation, no regret. Elio stood still. He knew that moment hadn't come from any technique or intervention. It had come from two beings who had shared the same room for days, across afternoons, across silences, across memories without words, and had finally met at a single fragile point: grief. After that day's therapy session, Noah didn't say much, but as he reached the door, he turned back and quietly asked Elio, "Has he ever dreamed?" Elio looked slightly surprised. He crouched down to Noah's eye level. "What do you mean?" Noah hesitated. "Last night, I dreamed my brother was calling me. In the dream, I was sitting in this room, and Luca made a sound, like he was trying to tell me that someone was still waiting for me." Elio didn't respond right away. He placed a gentle hand on the boy's shoulder and nodded, an acknowledgement of something words could never quite reach. That evening, Luca was returned to his kennel earlier than usual. Inside was something new, a sketch Elio had asked permission to keep from Noah. It showed two figures sitting under a tree, a child and a dog. No names, no colors, but their eyes faced the same direction toward the light. Luca lay down. The hallway light filtered through the bars, casting a soft glow across the paper, like moonlight gliding over a quiet lake. His eyes closed. His legs tucked close, his tail curled around him. That night, no one could be certain. But the night staff later recalled that at one point Luca let out a strange sound in his sleep, like a sigh of relief, like someone finding a forgotten scent deep in a long-lost dream. Elio recorded it in the log dream-wake connection observed between Luca and Noah. No interpretation necessary, just presence. And on the final line, he wrote a single word: continue. Late that weekend morning, in the dim, dust-scented archive room beneath the Arden Center, Elio bent over stacks of old folders under the flicker of yellow light. The files were faded and forgotten, marked non-relevant handwritten notes on outdated forms, scattered like memories no one had the strength to revisit. Beside him lay the small paper he'd found taped inside Luca's kennel that first night. His name is Shadow. Please don't leave him again. He's only afraid of sticks. In the lower corner of the page was a crude drawing, a girl standing beside a large dog, her hand in that of an older brother whose face wasn't drawn. Elio had scanned the image and digitally enhanced it for clarity, then printed a clean version for comparison. It was too rough to determine identity, but the earnest, uneven strokes lingered with him, because someone once had loved Luca. Enough to draw that picture. Enough to leave that note in silence. Enough to believe someone someday might read it, even if it was too late. It took Elio 2 days to trace the intake code and sequence number from Luca's rescue form. From there, he followed the paper trail to the original local investigation report, the one filed when a malnourished dog was found inside a padlocked house on the outskirts of town. The report included a short witness statement. Child witness claims she lived with her older brother in the house. Brother died in an assault 3 months prior. Assailant stepfather, also registered owner of the dog. Elio went still. He called the social worker listed on the case. A soft voice answered, an older woman. When Elio asked about the girl who had once lived in the house where Luca had been found, there was a pause. Then she said her name was Hannah, 6 years old. She's been placed with maternal relatives now, but... That day when we removed Luca from the kennel, she held my hand and cried, "Don't let them take him. He doesn't know where to run." Elio tightened his grip on the pen. He asked gently, "Did she leave anything behind? A note, a drawing, maybe?" "Yes," the woman said. She tucked a little folded paper into my coat. When I got back to the center, I taped it to his kennel. I was afraid someone would throw it away. But a few days later, I heard people saying the dog was too aggressive, might be put down. I didn't dare hope. Elio closed his eyes. It felt like something inside him was being pulled taut, like a thread he'd been following finally tugged at the deepest part of memory. That night, Elio returned to Luca's kennel. He didn't bring treats, no collar, only a reprinted version of that sketch. The girl and her brother holding hands beside the dog. He sat down and laid the paper in front of the kennel. Luca stepped forward, lowered his head, and looked. His eyes moved across the drawing, then stopped at the girl. Luca's chin slowly lowered to the ground. No growl, no reaction, just stillness settling into place opposite a memory. "Her name is Hannah," Elio whispered. "The only one who tried to hold on to you." Luca blinked. His ears dipped slightly. His body pulled inward, not in fear, but as if cradling something inside. Elio continued slowly, not like a doctor to a patient. but like a storyteller to a survivor. She lost her brother one night when no one protected her, and the dog she held on to was you. You couldn't save him, but she held on to you. She believed that someday someone would understand. Elio placed his hand on the ground, not reaching, not touching, just there, open. Luca stepped forward, slowly, and rested his chin in Elio's hand. That night, Elio wrote in the shift journal, "Identity of Shadow, confirmed via witness testimony from Hannah. Emotional reaction from Luca upon viewing drawing. Recommend continuation of memory-based emotional therapy." And at the end, he underlined one sentence: "A soul who once sheltered a child should never be forgotten." At the center, as the hallway lights dimmed and the night patrol passed through Kennel 3, remained lit by a single small lamp. Luca lay still, his chin pressed gently beside the drawing. His eyes stayed slightly open, as if standing guard over a memory, unwilling to let it drift away in sleep. In the middle of the week, the therapy room welcomed the afternoon sunlight like a soft scarf spread across the window pane. The air carried the faint scent of new paper. Noah had brought a new sketch pad that day, spiral-bound in pale green, neatly wrapped in clear plastic. He no longer clutched his teddy bear, nor did he lower his gaze when entering. Every step now was more sure-footed, though still marked by the cautious instinct of a child who had once walked through loss. Luca was already lying on the mat. His posture had no trace of defense left. His back stretched out, legs gently extended, head resting on the familiar towel Elio always brought along. His ears perked slightly but didn't move, a state of stillness that those in the field of therapy often call peaceful presence. Noah sat down beside him without needing instruction. He opened his sketchpad and pulled out a colored pencil. Today he drew faster, no hesitation. The pencil moved smoothly, occasionally tapping the paper hard enough to make a soft clack sound. There was a new freedom in his strokes, as if his heart now had room for sounds to enter without waking up old memories. Elio sat a few steps away, silent. He knew the quiet between Noah and Luca wasn't a void. It was its own form of dialogue, built from trust and the kind of silence that knows how to listen. Midway through the session, Noah leaned over to grab another pencil, but accidentally knocked one to the floor. The dry, crisp sound of it hitting the tiles echoed, clack, before settling still. Noah flinched. His body stiffened, a reflex born of memories that didn't always belong to the present. But before Elio could speak, something unexpected happened. Luca raised his head. He didn't spring up, didn't stumble. He calmly stood on all fours, eyes fixed on the pencil. One step, then another. He lowered his head and gently picked up the pencil in his mouth. Not tight enough to snap it, but secure enough not to drop it. He turned around, walked slowly back to Noah, and placed the pencil at the edge of the mat, right in front of the boy. Noah stared. His eyes widened. Then slowly his slender hands reached out and picked up the pencil, gaze still locked on Luca. In that moment, without applause, without a single word of encouragement, something was mended. Like a thread inside him, once broken, had quietly tied itself back together. Luca stayed. He lay down next to Noah and for the first time rested his head right against the boy's leg. Not touching, but close enough that his warmth could be felt, like a silent offer. "If you feel cold, I'll be here." Noah lowered his hand. Gently, he placed it on Luca's back. He didn't pet, he didn't tap, he simply let it rest, the way someone might place their hand on an old wall just to feel if a story still lives inside. When the session ended, Elio didn't write a report like he usually did. He simply drew a circle in the corner of the page, his personal symbol for sessions that didn't need words. That night, Luca returned to the kennel later than usual. When the staff opened the gate, he didn't go in right away. Instead, he turned his head and looked down the hallway toward the therapy room, the place Noah had left just moments before. Elio stood beside him and gently rested a hand on his head, fingers stroking the length of his back. The coat had grown glossier by the day, no longer ragged like when he first arrived. "You still remember, don't you?" he whispered. Luca didn't growl, didn't turn away. He simply closed his eyes for a moment, then stepped into the kennel and lay down in his usual spot. The next day, Noah brought a new drawing. In it, a dog lay beside a boy. The boy had no face, but the dog was drawn in perfect detail: upright ears, open eyes, a green pencil gently held in his mouth. In the bottom corner of the page, for the first time, there was a line of uneven handwriting he still remembers, even when no one calls his name. Elio paused when he read it. Outside the window, sunlight fell gently across the rug, scattering golden dots like fragments of memory. That evening, when Elio returned to Luca's kennel, he brought a small keychain. On it was a miniature print of the drawing Noah had made. He hung it on the left corner of the kennel, the very place where Luca often rested his head while sleeping. Luca walked over and sniffed it lightly. Then he lay down, chin nestled against the edge of the kennel, as if to guard something that had been handed to him, not with words, but with a hand, a drawing, and an entire afternoon of unspoken trust. Elio wrote in his journal, "Luca no longer fears the sound of falling pencils." His response was proactive, not reactive. Returning the item to Noah indicates a breakthrough. Not the erasure of memory, but the quiet re-entry of trust. Note: memories don't vanish, they simply retreat, but when met with patience, they will step out and quietly sit beside the one who needs them most. That morning, the Arden Center was wrapped in soft gray skies, clouds spreading like a gentle cloth over the earth. The therapy room had been arranged differently. Today was the first group interaction session, and Noah would be sitting with 2 other children in an open space. The familiar round mat was gone, replaced by a crescent of 3 small chairs and a large cushion in the center, reserved for Luca. Elio arrived early, checking every detail: the chair heights, how the light angled into the room, ensuring nothing would make the children feel exposed or displaced in their personal space. Noah was the last to arrive. He walked in with his familiar canvas backpack, a gray sweatshirt with sleeves pulled down over his hands. But today, something was different. He looked around the room. His eyes paused briefly on the other 2 children, a girl with side-tied curls and a thin boy wearing thick glasses. Then met Elio's, and he gave a small nod. Luca was already on the cushion, his eyes half-closed, expression calm. His presence softened the air in the room, as if with him, their tension had somewhere to dissolve. The session began with a familiar prompt: draw a place where you feel safe. Each child received a sheet of paper and a box of pencils. No one was required to share, but they could if they wished. Noah held his pencil. His hands didn't tremble. His strokes were slow, deliberate, like someone brushing away layers of earth to find something long buried. Luca remained still. But when Noah started drawing, he lifted his head, shifted posture, and rested his chin across his front paws, his gaze gently watching the boy. A soft form of attention, never interrupting, simply present, like a familiar shadow of trust. Toward the end of the session, a small incident occurred. As the group coordinator gathered the drawings, one of Noah's sheets slid off the table. He instinctively leaned forward to retrieve it and accidentally bumped his arm against the plastic table edge. The sound was barely audible, but it was enough for Noah to step back. His hand curled up in a defensive instinct, panic flashing through his eyes for a brief second. He retreated, breath-quickening gaze unfocused. The entire room fell into silence, and then, Right in that sliver of time before anyone could react, Noah whispered, "Luca, don't go." A murmur. Yet it rang out like a bell in a valley. Everyone froze. A young staff member who had been clearing the corner paused mid-motion, tears already swelling in her eyes. The lead therapist, the one who had been treating Noah for the past 4 months, broke into tears. She clutched her notebook tightly, lips sealed, as if afraid even a sob might shatter the sacredness of the moment. Elio said nothing. He simply stood behind Luca, both hands gently resting on the dog's collar. His eyes locked onto Noah, not visibly shaken, but carrying a sky quietly breaking into sunlight. Luca didn't move. He didn't advance, didn't scratch the floor like he sometimes did. He simply raised his head, and those deep, dark eyes stayed fixed on the boy. No one could say for certain if Luca understood Noah's words. But what was clear? He stayed. Noah trembled slightly, yet he didn't back away again. His hand lowered slowly, palm open, resting at the edge of the mattress, waiting. Luca stepped forward, one step, then another, slowly. And then he lay down beside the boy. The air in the room seemed to pause. Even Elio's breathing slowed. A few staff members quietly slipped out, not wanting to startle Noah and also to hide the tears they couldn't hold back. Noah leaned over, rested his cheek gently against Luca's shoulder, and whispered something so quiet no one could hear. But in his face was something unmistakable, a soul that had found the one presence that knew how to listen, simply by being there. Later, as Noah left the therapy room, he turned around one more time. "Will Luca be here tomorrow too?" he asked. Elio bent down, voice low but steady. "If you call his name, he said he won't leave." Noah smiled. For the first time, it was real. No forced stretch, no twisted corner of the mouth. Just a small smile, thin like the first line of sunlight on a winter morning. But so sincere that Elio had to glance away, just to swallow the lump rising in his throat. That night, Elio made an entry in the logbook, day 22. Noah called Luca by name today, out loud, on his own, clearly. No prompting, no coaxing, just a quiet collision with loss. And somehow that silent creature became something to hold on to. He underlined the last line in red ink. "A name spoken is a life held in place." The rain began early that evening. Heavy streams beat down the tall windows of the Arden Center, creating a murmuring chorus that filled the night. What was forecast to be a passing drizzle quickly turned into a violent storm. Sharp winds, thunder, cracks, unpredictable flashes of light. Inside the night shift room remained lit with a soft golden glow. Elio was finishing up the week's therapy reports. All hallways had been checked and secured. The children were asleep in their designated area, doors locked. Luca had been returned to his kennel, just like every night. But no one noticed the small window at the far end of the north corridor. Its wooden latch had decayed over the years. One strong gust, just one, was enough to blow it wide open. The window slammed against the wall, then yawned outward like an invitation to nowhere. Noah was asleep in room 2, blanket drawn up to his chest arms, hugging his sketchbook. But something in him had not drifted into full sleep. Thunder rumbled, distant at first, then closer, then striking like a hammer on a hollow drum. A flash of lightning blinked past the window, and Noah sat up. Eyes wide, blank. He moved without sound, almost gliding. His small fingers turned the doorknob, never locked per safety protocol. And within minutes, Noah stepped out into the corridor and followed the wind. No footsteps echoed. No one heard, except Luca. From inside the kennel, Luca's head snapped up. The storm should have drowned out everything. But something was off. His body tensed, Ears pricked forward. Something was missing from the wind. One scent was gone. Noah's. Luca shot up. He began to pace inside the kennel, heart testing the air at every angle. Then, he barked. Once, then again. A sharp, bold sound that hadn't been heard since the day he arrived at the center. It cut through the hallway like a flare in the dark. Office doors flung open. Elio ran out, heart slamming in his chest as he saw Luca twisting wildly in the kennel, eyes locked toward the north corridor. "What's going on, Luca?" He had never seen that look in the dog's eyes before. Panic mixed with something urgent. A warning. Another staff member rushed in, breathless. Noah's not in his room. Elio's entire body went cold. He flung the kennel open just in time. Luca bolted straight for the half-open hallway door. Wind roared in. The ceiling lights flickered. Thunder cracked over the trees outside. The north corridor led to the small therapy garden behind the center, home to lavender, chamomile, and healing herbs. Luca charged ahead. Elio followed, shouting Noah. No reply. Luca paused at the garden gate, nose to the ground, sniffed deeply, then turned east, where black shrubs lined a hidden trail. Rain poured. Mud sloshed underfoot. But Luca didn't stop. He barreled through the brush paws, kicking up leaves, and water headed for the grassy field that curved toward a small forest behind the facility. Suddenly, Elio heard a sharp crack, something snapping. Then, a breath. Heavy, ragged. Luca froze, then barked, sharp, loud, urgent, cutting straight through the storm. Elio turned on his flashlight. The beam pushed forward through the sheets of rain. There, Noah. The boy stood in the field bareheaded, soaked to the skin legs, caked in mud. His gaze was distant, completely lost in a trance. His arms hung loose. Lips moved as if repeating a name long gone. Elio ran. But Luca got there first. No barking now, no fear of thunder. He simply stepped closer slowly, then gently touched his muzzle to the boy's hand. In an instant, Garsadio son, like a heart jolted back into rhythm. Noah froze. His eyes blinked hard, and in that fragile second, as if a curtain of silence had just lifted, he burst into tears. Then he collapsed, wrapping his arms tightly around Luca's neck. "Luca, don't leave me." Elio arrived a moment later, kneeling beside them. He said nothing. He simply placed his hand gently on Noah's back, letting the boy bury his face between two beings, one man, one dog, who existed at that very moment only to hold him close to life. Back at the center, Luca lay sprawled across the carpet in the medical room, letting Noah rest his head on him. Elio sat nearby, holding an unfinished treatment file in his hands. At the top of the page he wrote, "First bark. Not to react, but to rescue." Then the next line, "When the wind tore open the door." It was a soul once silenced, who woke the entire building with the voice of the heart. The storm hadn't stopped. After lightning struck the western ridge, the facility lost all power for over 10 minutes. The hallways plunged into darkness, lit only by flashlights and emergency lanterns. The news of Noah's disappearance spread quickly, reaching even the neighboring search and rescue units. Elio's hand trembled as he signed the missing child report. This wasn't his world. He was a veterinarian, trained to listen to pain through breathing through heartbeats, not through walkie-talkies and forest maps soaked in rain. The team split into 3 groups. One headed north along the main trail. Another combed the flooded fields. Elio led the third into the thin woods where only forgotten footpaths remained, places even grown-ups often avoided. Luca's leash came off. Elio looked into his eyes and whispered, "Find him. I know you can." Luca didn't hesitate. He bolted, rain soaking his fur, his body stretched forward like an arrow loosed into a storm. His tail dropped low, ears pinned back, every muscle honed toward one direction, deep into the woods, where the wind howled like voices that once screamed but were never heard. Elio and 2 volunteers chased after him. Each step sank into mud snagged on wet leaves and broken twigs. But Luca never paused. He weaved through thickets, nose pressed to every root, his gaze unwavering, locked on something only he could sense, something waiting beyond the trees. Rain pounded like drum beats. The ground had become sludge. Branches cracked and collapsed from weight and wind. Elio shouted Noah's name, but only his own voice echoed back. Part of him knew no words would matter now. But still he needed to scream, to remind himself that silence wasn't yet allowed. Suddenly Luca stopped. His nose twitched sharply. He veered left toward a low rock ledge, a natural wall hidden deep in the woods. Behind it, almost swallowed by vines, was a narrow crevice barely marked on an old geological map. Luca raced to the edge and let out a sharp, piercing bark. Elio rushed forward and slipped in the mud. Scrambling up, he aimed his flashlight into the darkness and felt his heart nearly stop. Noah. The boy was wedged between 2 boulders, his small body pinned at the waist. Rainwater streamed down from the slope, flooding the crack. The water had risen to his chest. His lips were turning blue. His fingers scratched at the rock. And his eyes, those once silent eyes, were wide open, pleading for something to reach him before the current did. Noah. Elio's voice rang out just as Luca growled, a clean cutting sound, and leapt. He plunged into the icy water without pause, pressing himself beneath Noah's arms like a living support. Noah clung to his neck instinctively, as if the dog himself were the only raft in a rising sea. Elio slid down next, gripping Noah's shoulders. "Hold tight, I'm pulling you out." A volunteer crawled into position and clipped a harness around Elio's waist, anchoring them. 3 people, 1 dog, and 1 boy. Drowning in more than just water, sinking inside a memory he hadn't escaped. Minutes passed, minutes that stretched like hours, until finally they pulled Noah free from the fissure. His skin was cold, lips trembling, but breath still fluttered in his chest. And in his fist, he was still clutching Luca's fur. Luca didn't move. He stayed beside the boy, letting him cling, never whimpering despite his own bruises from the rocks. Elio took off his coat, wrapping it around Noah and pressing his own back against the boy's to warm him. He looked at Luca, soaked to the bone, body shaking, but eyes locked on Noah like sentinels. "You did it, Luca," Elio whispered. "You kept his heartbeat alive." At the center, as the pediatric team worked to stabilize Noah, conscious but severely hypothermic. Luca sat outside the ICU, soaked and still, ears perking up every time someone said the boy's name. Elio submitted only 1 sentence in the rescue report. "There was a moment we thought he was gone forever. But from the forest, through storm and wind, a single bark rose and led us back to what mattered most, a life that must not be forgotten." At midnight, Noah lay in the recovery room of 4, in his arm wrapped in blankets. His voice was dry when he asked, "Where's Luca?" Elio leaned down and placed a hand on his shoulder. "Right outside. He's been there since we found you." Noah closed his eyes. A faint smile rose at the corners of his mouth, barely a breath. But Elio recognized it. It was the first smile Noah had given life after once believing he had nothing left. The storm had passed, but the woods still dripped with mist and dew. Water clung to the leaves above, like memories too heavy to fall. Elio's watch blurred with rain, but he didn't look away from the sight that seized his throat. Luca, once labeled beyond recovery, was curled tightly around Noah's fragile body. They lay together in the mud between boulders and forest, as if that patch of earth had been carved just for them. Luca's fur was soaked, streaked with dirt and blood from minor cuts. But he didn't move, didn't flinch, didn't utter a sound. He simply stayed, head resting on Noah's shoulder, one paw gently draped over the boy's leg, as if to say, "I am here. I will stay. You are safe." Noah had fallen asleep, his pale face tinted by the cold, but his lips still murmured something faint and unclear. Each breath he exhaled was as fragile as mist. But it was steady. It was still the rhythm of life. Elio knelt beside them. His hands trembled as they touched Luca's back. There was still warmth there, but barely. Two beings, one boy, one dog. Drenched to the bone, shivering in silence, yet bound together by something far warmer than blankets, the will to live anchored by trust. And Elio, who once believed he had grown numb to fragile lives, hovering on the brink, could no longer hold it in. He bowed his head, and his tears slipped silently onto the boy's soaked shoulder, sinking into the soil like an unspoken prayer of gratitude. When the rescue team arrived, Elio waved them into stillness. They moved quietly, laying thermal blankets over Noah, then over Luca. But Luca wouldn't let anyone lift him. He remained exactly where he was, eyes open, softening only when they met Elio's. "It's okay now," Elio whispered. "I'll take it from here." It took several gentle attempts before Luca allowed himself to be moved. Even then, he refused to leave Noah's side. Wrapped in warm towels, he kept his head resting on the boy's hand, as if afraid that letting go, even for a moment, might let the child slip back to a place the dog could never follow. In the emergency medical ward, Noah was placed on a heated bed, IV fluids and oxygen, gently administered. Luca sat by his side, soaked his fur, tangled and muddy, but his eyes never left the boy's face. When Noah's eyes finally fluttered open, the ceiling light reflected in his pupils, and he blinked. He muttered a single word. "Luca." The sound was coarse, fragile, but it was the clearest sign yet that he had come back. The doctors exchanged glances. One or two even smiled. But Elio remained still, gripping his notebook. Not to write, but to remember that Luca had saved the boy, not through dramatic acts, but with his soaked body curled around life itself. Later, when Elio led Luca into the hallway to dry him off, the dog stopped in his tracks. He turned toward the room, unwilling to be even one step away. Elio crouched down and wrapped a towel gently around him. "You blocked the wind for Noah," he whispered. "Let me carry the scars you've earned." Luca exhaled, then looked up, his eyes no longer cold or panicked like before. Now they held something else, a quiet, glowing ember, the kind of light born only in those who have fallen to the bottom, yet choose to rise and warm others even when they themselves are still soaked. That night, Elio didn't return to the on-call room. He dozed beside Noah and Luca, their breathing slow beneath the soft hum of medical machines. Outside, the rain became a distant murmur. Before falling asleep, Elio opened his notebook and wrote a single line. "There are cold nights you never forget." Because someone voiceless used their entire body to shield a heart that hadn't finished growing from being swept away. He drew a small circle beneath the line, a symbol of rebirth, beginning in the very place thought too broken for return. The district hospital smelled faintly of antiseptics, and the morning hallway echoed with the slow roll of wheels on white tiles. Room 3A's window faced a row of bougainvilleas, now basking in the soft light of a new day, though the rain's remnants still streaked the ground. Noah awoke after nearly 4 hours of sleep, warmed by the heater, the IV drip, and a towel gently wrapped around his shoulders. His first movement was to turn toward the left, where Luca lay, eyes half shut, muzzle resting against the foot of the bed, tail still dusted with dried earth. Elio sat at the end of the bed, awake all night, his notebook open in his lap. His hand hovered over the pen, but didn't write. He simply watched. A nurse entered with a smile as gentle as morning sun. "Hello, sweetheart. Do you remember anything? Do you feel any pain?" Noah blinked. His hand moved slowly, then rested on his chest, where his heart still beat weak but steady. He didn't speak. The nurse checked his vitals, then leaned over to look at the dog. "Did this pup come back with you from the forest? Do you know his name?" Noah lifted his eyes. This time there was no hesitation, no confusion. He looked straight at Luca, as if to ask the dog one last time. "Are you really here? Not gone, not fading?" Then he nodded. His voice was hoarse but clear, Shadow. "His name is Shadow. He came back for me." The nurse paused. Her hand stopped mid-note. She looked at Elio for confirmation. But Elio said nothing. He simply smiled. The kind of smile someone wears only after having something returned they thought forever lost. Shadow. The name once scribbled on a label outside a kennel. The name that had lived in the memory of a girl who lost her brother. The name no one dared to speak again, for fear of reopening a shattered memory. But now, a different child, frail but fierce, had spoken it. Not out of pity, not to revive pain, but because he understood Shadow wasn't just a name. It was a promise once lost, now found again. That afternoon, when the chief physician came to check on him, he asked, "So what do you want to name the dog? I'll write it in the chart." Noah looked over at Luca, his hand clenching the blanket, his eyes steady. "His name is already Shadow, the old name, the name he once had. I don't need to change it. I'm just saying it again." The doctor nodded. Elio stood beside them, his throat tightening. Later at the rescue center, as they updated the dog's records, the receptionist turned to Elio. "What official name should we record?" Dr. Elio didn't pause. "Shadow. Confirmed by whom?" He pointed toward a medical file signed by Noah, by the one who named him, again. That night in his hospital room, Noah opened a fresh sketchbook and wrote one simple line. "Not everyone who calls your name will keep you. But once you return, you stay." Below it, he drew two interlocking circles. One was the shadow of a child curled up. The other was a dog sitting behind, without touching, only being there. Shadow lay beside the boy, his eyes half closed. But the moment Noah placed a hand on his back, the dog stirred slightly, tilted his head, and gently pressed his cheek against the boy's palm. A quiet gesture, but one that said clearly, this time the shadow wasn't leaving. On the way back to the center, after all the hospital discharge paperwork was complete, Elio stopped the car in a short stretch of woods to let Shadow breathe. When the door opened, the dog stepped out, took a few calm paces, and lifted his head to catch the wind. As if recalling the rain-soaked night, the stone crevice, and the fading heartbeat beneath his body, Elio approached, lowered himself onto the grass, and whispered, "A name is how a living being knows they were never truly forgotten." Shadow didn't bark. He simply blinked once, then turned and walked back toward the car, where Noah stood with the door open and arms stretched wide as if that silhouette had always belonged to him. That night, back at the center with Noah, granted 2 more days for observation, the boy drew a new picture. In it were the silhouettes of a child and a dog sitting side by side in a long corridor. No faces, no colors, just shadows. True to the name Shadow, but moving together toward the light. The morning sun filtered through Elio's white curtains, casting soft stripes onto the edge of his old wooden desk. Outside the window, lavender had just begun to bloom, their first blossom since a winter that lingered longer than usual. The air was calm, but something inside Elio stirred with a strange tenderness, as though a part of life, once interrupted, had now found its next chapter. On his desk, a new file lay neatly clipped. Beside it, a silver signing pen, his mother's gift from veterinary school. The document title read, Certificate of Adoption, Special Rehabilitation Case. Below it, bold letters, Shadow, Adopter Elio Marine. Elio sat still for a long time. His eyes paused on the words, Special Rehabilitation. Something about that phrase made his heart slow down, as if it needed more time to fully accept that this life had truly come back. Not by medicine nor through therapy sessions, but through a series of quiet, kind choices. From children from a girl named Hannah, and now from a boy named Noah. Shadow was no longer in the kennel wing. He now had a space of his own, a corner room with a window, soft mat, personal blanket, and a water bowl engraved with the letter S. Every afternoon after school, Noah would stop by to play with Shadow. The boy had been placed with an aunt nearby thanks to the social welfare unit. His healing was slow but steady. No more waking up in the night. No more prolonged silence. And most telling of all, he had begun to draw again. Not to forget, but to remember. That day, Noah entered Elio's office carrying a freshly finished drawing. He said nothing. Just sat down beside the desk, unfolded the paper, and placed it in front of Elio. The picture showed a wide field with 3 figures and a dog at the center. Shadow lay next to a boy, clearly Noah, smiling hand resting on the dog's back. Farther behind, a larger figure stood, faceless arms outstretched as if embracing them both. Elio looked closer. Behind that adult was another young man, taller, leaner, his face drawn, clearly smiling at Noah. "And this is?" Elio asked gently. Noah nodded, voice barely more than breath. "That's him, the one who had Shadow before me. I think if he could choose again, he'd want Shadow to be with me." Elio tightened his hold on the drawing. His hand trembled, not just from emotion, but from understanding. Noah wasn't erasing memories. He was connecting what had never been linked before. "So, what's the title of this piece?" Noah smiled, pointing to the bottom corner. In black ink, the words read, "A life not abandoned," just waiting for someone to rewrite it. The adoption file was submitted officially that very day. Elio signed it in the presence of the center director, volunteers, and a few staff members who had worked with Shadow throughout his recovery. Shadow sat calmly by Elio's side during the signing, obedient, serene. But when Elio placed a hand on his head, the dog lifted his gaze. In those eyes still lingered the same look that had once saved a boy deep in the forest. Warm, deep, and grateful. "From now on, we're going home together," Elio whispered. "No more cages, no more waiting lists. You belong to this family now." That evening, Elio walked Shadow along the gravel path behind the center. A quiet trail leading to a small meadow, his favorite place for solitude. Shadow walked beside him, steps unhurried. His body still carried old scars, remnants of hunger beatings and abandonment. But his gait had changed. There was no tension now. Each step was a rhythm of trust. In the person beside him, in the road ahead, and in his right to exist in this world. Elio stopped in the middle of the field, knelt down and placed a hand on Shadow's shoulder. "You were once Luca, then Shadow. But to me, you are proof that no life is broken, only waiting for someone who knows how to hold on." Shadow licked his hand. A simple gesture. But Elio knew this time it wasn't for food or training. It was trust, pure and quiet. That night, Elio placed Noah's drawing into a wooden frame and hung it on his office wall. He stood for a long time in silence. The picture was more than a child's artwork. It was a declaration every soul deserves to be rewritten, not out of pity, but out of presence. And from that day on, Shadow was no longer the dog once on the euthanasia list. He was part of a new story, a story written by the hands of those who had been broken, but never stopped hoping. The first light of morning filtered through the glass, spilling soft ribbons across the floor. No car horns, no hurried footsteps in the hallway. Only the quiet stillness of an ordinary morning, where everything moved slow enough for one to hear the steady breath of someone still curled in sleep. On the large bed covered with an ash-gray blanket, Luca, or rather Shadow, lay stretched out between Elio and Noah. His body was completely at ease, muzzle tilted slightly toward Noah, tail gently curled by Elio's feet. His fur still held darker patches from the rain, the night before now dried, carrying the scent of morning sunlight, blended with the familiar warmth of the room. Pinewood healing salves, and a faint trace of ink, bleeding from a sketchbook, left near the headboard. Noah was still asleep, his head resting on his left arm, while his right hand lay gently on Shadow's back, right in the spot he'd grown used to placing it over the past few months. Every time it rained, the boy would reach out like this. Not out of fear, not to test, but just to know that this being was still here, still hadn't left. Elio woke first. He didn't move, only turned his face slightly to watch the two lives beside him. Normally, he would be up by now, down in the kitchen brewing coffee, preparing Shadow's food. But this morning, when he saw what lay before him, a boy who once said nothing, once fought just to survive, and a dog who once starved alone, once curled up waiting to be discarded, now sleeping together on one bed wrapped in a gray blanket, peaceful as if no storm had ever passed through them. He didn't want to disturb the silence. Outside, leftover raindrops clung to the window frame, sliding down one by one. But no one flinched, because now every sound of rain was simply a sign that a new day had begun, no longer a memory to be suppressed. After breakfast, Noah came downstairs wearing an oversized gray sweater. He sat by the window looking out toward the garden. Shadow lay right by his feet, head resting gently on the leg of the chair, eyes half closed. "Is it still raining today?" Elio the boy asked. "A little, but the sun will come out soon." Noah nodded. He didn't ask anything more. He simply reached down and stroked Shadow's back. A motion so natural, it felt like he'd done it 1,000 times. But Elio noticed something today when a low rumble of thunder rolled in the distance. Noah didn't flinch. He didn't curl up, didn't grab his sleeve. He sat straight, watching the raindrops on the glass, his hand resting calmly on his friend's back. That evening, Noah drew a new picture. On the paper was a bed, the gray blanket, and 3 shapes curled close together. No faces, no detail. Just warm outlines wrapped around one another. In the bottom corner, he wrote a single line. "Some mornings don't need alarms when the heart knows exactly when it's safe to open its eyes." Elio framed the drawing and placed it on the shelf beside a photo of his mother, the woman who once told him, "You can't save every life, but you can be a shelter for the one that finds its way to you." When he turned back, he saw a shadow lying at Noah's feet again. Outside, the rain kept falling gently. Noah said nothing, but once more his hand rested on Shadow's back, like a small door opening, then closing, then resting still. Light, but sure. That night, Elio wrote in his journal, "No loud thunder, no long night." Sometimes healing arrives on a quiet morning, where breath and trust wrap together in a gray blanket and a name once spoken is called again, just so it won't disappear. Elio's clinic was small, tucked behind an alley lined with old sow trees, its walls moss-covered, its wooden door repainted every rainy season. People didn't come here for the latest technology or luxury. They came for the eyes of the doctor, the kind that always listened whether treating a cat with the sniffles or an old dog on its final visit. That morning, Elio's first appointment was at 7:30. A white cat from the elderly woman 3 streets over, choking on a fish bone. But instead of heading into the prep room like usual, he stood before the empty wall in the waiting area. where he had just decided to hang something more meaningful than any diploma he had ever earned. The drawing. Noah's drawing. The A3 paper was slightly wrinkled, its bottom edge still marked from a time it had been soaked by the rain. In it, 3 faceless figures nestled beneath a gray blanket, not intricate, not perfect, but holding everything Elio believed in the peace of lives that once seemed too broken to heal. He framed it with unvarnished oak, no glass cover, so the paper could keep its aged texture. Beneath it, on a thin wooden plaque, Elio carved the words by hand. There are lives that only need someone patient enough to stay, and a chance to be called by the name that's truly theirs. The day the picture was hung, Shadow lay beneath the reception desk. He was a little bigger now, his coat fuller, his old scars healed, but still visible under the light, like soft reminders that every healing carries its memory. Noah was there too. He sat beside Shadow, hands still on his friend's back, a habit that never changed. Even though he had returned to school, played with other kids, even answered when the teacher called his name. This moment in the clinic was still the one he chose for quiet, as if his heart was being recharged one beat at a time. A young couple walked in carrying a tiny puppy. When the little dog spotted Shadow, it startled and shrank back. But just a moment later, when Shadow tilted his head, without stepping forward, without barking, without a hint of threat, the puppy slowly approached and gently touched its nose to Shadow's leg. Elio smiled. No words needed, he whispered to the worried woman beside him, just the right kind of presence. In that day's patient log, Elio added a note beside each name. Add 3 extra minutes of observation, just in case someone is waiting to be called by the name that belongs to them. Later that afternoon, when Noah was about to leave, he turned back to the picture. He walked over, took a pencil from his sweater pocket, and quietly added one small detail to the edge of the page. A tiny hand clutching the floppy ear of a dog. Elio asked softly, "Why did you add that?" Noah smiled gently. "So that if someone sees the drawing and doesn't understand, they'll know. A life was saved just because someone held on." Elio nodded. He didn't say anything more. But after Noah walked away, he quietly rewrote the inscription beneath the drawing. Still the same words, only with one gentle addition at the end. And perhaps that life will end up holding on to the one who once held on to it. That night, after locking up the clinic, Elio took Shadow for a walk along the river road. The same path where he had once taken his first steps after losing his mother, after turning down the offer from a major hospital and choosing instead to volunteer at a small rescue center. The amber streetlights cast a soft glow on the pavement, and the water shimmered with the rhythm of the breeze. Shadow walked beside him occasionally, turning his head. Not waiting for a command, just making sure Elio was still there. And Elio understood. They were both continuing a story that didn't need to be told in words. Because some messages aren't written in letters. They're written in glances, in the rhythm of a heartbeat, in the simple act of staying, even when no one asks you to. And sometimes just one soul, patient enough to remain, is enough to change the life of someone on the edge of letting go. The story of Shadow, the once abandoned German shepherd who had been placed on a list for euthanasia, isn't merely a tale of recovery. It's living proof that a life once forgotten, once broken, can still be rewritten. With patience, with compassion, and with a name spoken at the right moment. The German shepherd, a breed known for its loyalty, intelligence, and emotional sensitivity, isn't just a partner in work or training. They reflect the very best of who we are, brave, intuitive, capable of listening without a word, and staying exactly when someone needs them the most. Shadow never barked for attention. He simply lay beside a boy who had once fallen silent. He used his body to block the wind, to keep warm beneath the rain. And in that quiet presence, without commands, without fanfare, he held a heartbeat steady, awakened a voice, and helped begin a new chapter for two lives once unraveling. This story isn't just for dog lovers. It's for anyone who has ever lost faith, ever questioned their worth, ever wondered if they were too broken to be held on to. Because sometimes all it takes is a look, a hand resting on your back, or a name called with love, to remind you that you are still alive and you are worthy of being here. So be kind, listen deeply, and if you can, be the first one to stay when a soul is waiting to be called by its true name.